All right, so I'd love to just if you could kind of share a few stories from some of your dev group deployments that are
Yeah,
memorable. That ideally, if you haven't shared before, just so that they're new, but
yeah,
anything that comes to mind that's memorable.
yeah. This barricaded shooter one was pretty hairy. Because you talk about like things going south, and like it did, and luckily, one guy got shot in the arm. We didn't lose anybody, but the barricaded shooter thing was like such a problem, and where we learned so much, So we're on this op. We're going up in the mountains, up north in Afghanistan, from Jbad into like Kapisa sort of mountains, and long walk. Everybody's exhausted by the time we get there. Lots of ups and downs, like straight ups and downs. We get to this target. It's like this. It almost looks like the Grand Canyon a little bit with how deep this canyon kind of went down, and this little village was like built into the side of the canyon, right? So we make our way in, not knowing that there's like the floor level and then multiple underground levels of like almost like basements going down the mountain as part of the same compound. So it really gets sketchy after that, right? So get the assault guys. We get in. They start assaulting. They kill a few dudes. They get into a little couple of engagements, kind of on the first level, and I'm getting recruited into the recce team by one of our like recce team leaders, and so this is towards the end of deployment. So I'm starting to now break away from the assault team to go, like hang out with the recce guys and see how they operate and what they do. So I was kind of doing that, and and it gave me a good vantage point of what happened in this op. While the assault team that I'm still part of is down doing the action against this like barricaded shooter. So and the dog's running around all over the place because this place is really weird, right? And we get down, and a couple of the guys that were shooting end up down in this like two levels down underground into this dark room with a couple different hallways in sort of like a Z pattern. So if the room was set sort of in the middle of this thing, there's a hallway going out and then back up to the ground level, and then another hallway kind of going in an L-shaped corner with other rooms going out just to the exterior of the compound, which was just this big wall with a random hole in it that just drops down into like the canyon, sort of on the side of that, right? With no ladder, no way to like. I don't know what the intention was of that hallway, but there's like it doesn't look like there's a way to even get down from there. It's just an opening in the side of the compound. So we get down there, there's a barricaded shooter, and we know they've got grenades, and it becomes this really hairy problem where the assault team's stacked up in this hallway going both ways in this room tucked away in the middle where we can't see the bad guys, but we know they're in there. And every time we're, toss a couple of grenades around, they start lighting up the wall with AKs, right? And we're like, fuck, this is a hard problem, right? And they're pretty high up on the network, so we want to get them. We don't want to. The thing that's hard about not getting the guy you're after is like you just did all that work, hiked all that way, like only to leave. It's just so we were being aggressive, and we're gonna get these guys, and we get a couple both assault team leaders come down there, and they're like they both got a lot of experience. One came from Blue Squadron before Silver, one came from Red, and they're like competing for who's gonna T-bomb, thermobaric grenade this room, right? Which would have had a really good effect because it was down, it was contained. It really would have had a good effect. So they start to do that, and as we're creeping around trying to do that, they just keep getting lit up on the wall, right? And the dog's trying to go in there. We're like, hey, wait on the dog. Let's try to get a T-bomb in there first. So as we're doing that, I think they like hucked out our grenade, and one guy, and they threw it the wrong direction, thinking we were on the other side of the hallway instead of this side. Because every time they did it, we'd all just kind of back out, right, and not go full assault into there. So we're playing the whole barricaded shooter game, just being really patient, getting reactions from these guys, and that was one of my first real. I experienced some barricaded shooters, but it was a pretty simple problem. The way the structure was set up with it, like, this one was tough. I was like, damn, there's no other way into that room. If we can't really drop on it because it's multiple levels down, we won't get them. So they toss it. One of the recce guys that was up sort of the stairwell that leads up got fragged like in the leg from that grenade. So he pulls up, and eventually the two team leaders just go, "Hey, we're just gonna run up and toss a T-bomb into this thing." And so it's like 3, 2, 1, go. So one of the team leaders dips into a room that's over to the side. The other one kind of comes up, throws a T-bomb in. It hits the wall and kind of bink, bink, bink. Doesn't make it. And we're like, oh, shit. So we duck back. It goes off. Knocks the door that the other team leader was in over on him. So now he's like stuck under this heavy-ass, like thick wood door or whatever it was made out of. And, you know, now a couple of assaulters go left to get that off of him and sort of dip into that room and clear him. And then at the same time, the guys are lighting up the wall, you know, across from them, thinking that we're going to come in and assault. So we're like, okay, we got to get another one in there. So now, cool, 3, 2, 1, he gets one in there, and it blows up one of the two guys. But as it's going off, now there is one of the assaulters that was in that room, like kind of a real beast of an operator type dude. Like he was like Arnold Schwarzenegger, you know, just like jacked kind of guy. Is like peeling down the hallway the other direction to that opening, which he doesn't know what's out there, but there's other rooms down there, and he's trying to find a better position, right? At the same time, one of the two bad guys peels around into that hallway and starts lighting up down the hallway towards that guy. And so he like kind of turns and just, I was on the outside of this seeing like bullets spraying out of that hole in the hallway, going like, oh shit, shit's still going down in there. And as the bullets are spraying out, this Hulk of an operator, he dives out to get out of it, and like full, like he's vertical,
Superman
or
style.
he's horizontal, and he just goes whoo, and then it's like a 7-foot drop and just like lands on a bunch of rocks at the bottom of this thing. And then I was like, oh shit. So I started to scramble down to go help him. I was like, he's for sure going to be either shot up, you know, or fucked up from breaking something. Cause that was like, just imagine jumping off with all your kit, you know, 7 feet down, and then like just landing on rocks. Yeah. And as I'm making my way over there, he just gets up and dusts himself off. And I was like, what the fuck? And I'm like, are you all right? You know? And so that T-bomb worked. He ended up killing those guys. And it was a hairy mess. Both of those, there was a lot more that happened in that scenario, but both of those team leaders ended up getting silver stars. Wow. Because they were just like risking themselves. And, you know, we couldn't have known what else was going on in there with those guys. But there was a team of assaulters that was getting ready to go populate those hallways to do clearance. And these two team leaders stopped them. And we're like, hey, let's like, basically, you guys just hold up there. It's just too risky, and us first two guys are going to go, because if anything happens, at least only 2 of us are going to get killed.
That's inspiring as fuck, man, to hear that. Like
it was pretty amazing. It was pretty badass. You know,
have you ever found yourself in positions like, of all of the missions you did at DEVGRU, where you run into a situation like that and you guys actually do determine, this isn't fucking worth it, let's just fucking back out and live to fight another day? Did you find yourself in positions like that?
Yeah, I think we did that a couple of times. We did it in Iraq a couple of times, where like the EOD guys will call landslide. It's like, hey, this place is rigged up, and one of our EOD guys was finding like wires all over this place, and so we're like, hey, we just backed off. But back then in Iraq, the ROEs were like pretty stringent in that war. It was like collateral damage was like 20 before there was even any shooter statements or anything. So it was like, of course, we didn't train to kill 20 people every time we went out, right? That would be bad. But if there was some collateral damage, like it was just war at that time. So, but there was a couple of times where we're like, hey, it was a lot easier to back out and just drop a bomb on that. But once we started getting into the strict ROEs of Afghanistan, it was a lot harder for a ground force commander to make that decision, knowing that like the collateral damage was 0, you know?
Yeah.
So it actually resulted in what the general public or like staff, you know, decision makers for ROEs in America wouldn't realize is the effect of those stricter ROEs in a war like that. Now we know all the politics of it and all the opium trade bullshit and uncovering how much funding has been going to the Taliban, knowing that it's not that it's for the opium trade or whatever, you know, and all the bullshit of the 20-year war that we now know, right? What they didn't realize is that fucking around with the ROEs like that for those causes is like that's why these two guys either got 2 silver stars or would have gotten killed so that their team could go like accomplish this mission after these guys that we're after. So it's like you're starting to make decisions when we could have backed out and dropped a bomb or something, you know?
Yeah.
So, but that operator that jumped out got up and he was actually shot in the arm from one of those rounds. He's so fucking muscular that it lodged into his shoulder. And
I assume you can't say his name, right?
his name's Chad. I
Okay.
won't say his last name, just
Yeah.
only because I haven't asked those guys permission.
Yeah.
So he was one of the most badass motherfuckers too that I ever worked with, and he continued on and became a troop chief, and probably beyond that, I wouldn't doubt if he becomes like the command CMC and even further after that. But he dusted himself up and then ran back around to join the team.
Yeah.
Like after that.
Fucking pipe hitter, man.
That was the definition of a pipe hitter. That
Yeah.
of anything I ever saw, that dude getting shot in the arm as he was diving out and then just gets up after that was a definition of a pipe hitter to me.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting as I get older and, you know, being a father and looking back on when I was, you know, in my 20s in Iraq, chomping at the bit to operate and, you know, wanting to just push the fucking envelope in every way. I was very fortunate here just last week, actually, to interview Vice Admiral Harward. I don't know if you know.
Oh, cool. You
Yeah.
didn't catch that one.
Yeah. And it was fascinating because you know, he was my CO the day I checked into SEAL Team 3, and then he was the Commodore when we went into Iraq. Being a lowly enlisted sled dog guy in a platoon while he was the guy at the helm making the decisions, it was really cool to kind of bounce our perspectives of what was going on, why it was going on, et cetera, back and forth because they were polar opposites. And that was one of the questions I asked him, and one I would ask you is that, you know, from our perspective, there were times, not the entire campaign, but there were times when we were there where we felt like you were holding us back and it pissed us off.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and what he told me resonated a ton. I think it resonates now. I don't know that it would have then, or I wouldn't have grasped it the way I do now. Again, being a dad, a business owner, and just, you know, pushing 50 years old. But he said, you know, there were even questions in his mind at that level as to whether or not we should even be there. He's like, now I would never have communicated that down.
Yeah.
Because the last thing I want to do is have any doubts in your guys' mind, because that's not going to do anybody any good. The fact is, we're here. This is what we're being told to do, and it's my job to bring everybody home and be as successful as possible. And by sowing resentment or discontent or second guessing isn't going to help any of those things. So I understood that, but also he said, you know, each individual mission, we're always, you know, when you're in my position, him, not me, you're constantly weighing the gravity of the mission and how important it is to accomplish it and what the risks are and if they're worth it. And he's like, and in my mind, you know, your guys' lives aren't worth a lot of the things that we were being asked to do. And while I know that's frustrating for you, he's like, I don't want to lose you guys for shit that doesn't need to really get done. As much as you want to do it, every time you go do something, you're flipping a fucking coin as to whether or not you come back.
Yeah.
And to me, it was just like to hear him say that, like at that level, and know that that was what's going through his mind. It gave me a completely different perspective and a really, really high level of respect for him.
Yeah.
It was a really refreshing answer. One, to hear like, hey, you know, we had our doubts too. And you know, there's times where we're trying to decide, like the intel that's coming in that we're corroborating from all these different intelligence sources and what they say you guys are going into, and then saying, okay, well, is it really worth risking our guys? He's like, even if you remove the human component, the fact that you guys are lives, he said, even if you looked at it purely from a business standpoint of how much money we have into each and every one of you guys and how hard it is, how long it takes to get a guy that says, hey, I want to be a SEAL, until you're operationally in a combat environment that is not an easy thing to accomplish. He's like, it's just not worth it, and I just never, maybe it's dumb for me to have never looked at it that way. I just never looked at it that way.
Yeah.
But I do now, and it made sense. And I actually really respect the fact that he thought that way. My question to you is, especially being at that level, and one of the things you mentioned that resonated with me is that, we walked all that way. We went through all this work and planning and whatever to get to this point only to back out. It kind of reminds me of like, don't stay, in relation to staying in a marriage that you shouldn't, like, don't stay, in a bad relationship just because you've spent so much time doing it. Like, it kind of reminds me of that same thing. But I would ask you, like, put you in the CO of SEAL Team 6's shoes or whatever. Like, would you view it as that way in that particular instance? Like, yeah, we need to get this guy, but it's not worth risking losing our guys. Let's back out and fucking just bomb the place. Like, would you look at it that way?
Yeah, it's such a hard balance that, there's a whole game between officers and enlisted guys where you're like, hey, the fun thing to talk about is like, if you want to be a shooter and an assaulter, like you got to be enlisted because the officers don't shoot, or they're not supposed to, right?
Yeah.
If there's a firefight or something, but like generally, for us, it's like
they should be looking and
they're hanging around outside doing comms, setting it all up while the assaulters are inside doing all this stuff, and then when it's clear, they come in, right? But fast forward to now, where I'm done and I'm looking back on things and thinking about my past life and going, God, it must have been such a hard thing for them to balance to, one, know a little bit more truth about everything than we do as operators, because all we need to know is who the fuck we're going after. Who we're going to get, how we're going to get there, right? And when we get there, how are we going to get to him? What kind of assault are we going to do, And then all the afterwards, okay, cool. Once we got him, how are we going to get, where are we going to go? We're going to get to the helos, whatever. And it's really all you had time to do if you wanted to be really good at your job, But then when you start doing outstation stuff and the war started to get, picked apart with ROEs and it just became very obvious that there was other, joint staff level decisions being made on why we were there and what we're doing. That became obvious over time. That's the moment I think that it must have gotten really hard for officers at whatever level, whether junior or the damn CO, to balance the team, the mindset of the team, because like if you do too much of that, where, like you said, he held back a lot of the information because he didn't want to create resentments and things like that in his guys or unnecessary stress. But sometimes guys will get angry because you're like, dude, I'm pissed off because you're not telling me the truth behind what the fuck we're doing here. This deployment, are we here to build hearts and minds or whatever they used to call it, say, because they used to fucking tell us that shit. Like, hey, this deployment, we're teaching these guys, these partner force dudes, how to operate, and then taking them on operations, knowing that damn well that they couldn't conduct it without us doing part of the assault. So that was where the game got really hard, where it was like, hey, we're reporting that they're doing everything, but everybody at the highest level knows that we're doing we're doing it with them, right? So my opinion about that question is just like, I totally understand it and have a different respect, for it. It was just a hard thing to balance, but, try my best to not hold too much resentment for, one, if anybody says, I've got buddies, like a couple MARSOC buddies that run a fun podcast to watch called Strange Times or something like that, where they're picking apart, different conspiracy theories and different things, and they seem angry, about the war being like, what the fuck were we doing there? It was a waste of time, half of it or more than half of it. And I bring myself to believe that I'm not going to let myself believe that any moment of it was a waste of time. Even if we say we lost the war, all this dumb shit happened, it was ridiculous how we exited and all the stuff that happened there was fucked up. To remember that us operators, when we're there, like, what are the real reasons why we're doing it, right? And the whole thing that always comes back to operators and assaulters is like, we're doing it for the guy next to us. And
And
like, yeah, you're doing it for the country, but when you're there, you're doing it to keep each other alive and do your job at the same time. So I'm not ever gonna say or think to myself that any one of my teammates that was lost was for nothing. It's like because when they were lost, they were doing their job, right? And they were highly inspired to do their job at all costs. And like that's what we're supposed to do, and that's what you do. You do your job, so you don't have time to think about it until afterwards.
well, I think it's counterproductive to think of it, was it a waste or not? Because at the end of the day, any of us who join the military at whatever level, you're essentially saying, hey, I'm willing to give everything, up to and including my life for this country. And I'm entrusting that our upper echelons of government leadership have our best interest in mind, are going to use us in the best way possible and how they see fit. Now, we could very easily argue that maybe they didn't do that.
Yeah.
However, that doesn't change the sentiment for everybody who joined the military and why they did it.
That's right.
And I think taking it a step further is that for our country to maintain its greatness, for all its flaws, it's not perfect, but it is a great country. I truly believe that, and I wouldn't have joined the military if I didn't believe that. And I would do it all over again. Not at this age, of course, but as an 18-year-old, I would go through the same process and pipeline to do it all again. But I think this country and any country who wants sovereignty and a society based on tenets of freedom to the best of its ability needs a percentage of the population that's willing to do that.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I agree with you. I don't ever think it's a waste. I think mistakes were for sure made, and yeah, we could sit here and argue, should we have spent 20 years in Afghanistan or should we have spent about 3 months? Probably should have spent about 3 months. Should we have even gone into Iraq? Probably not. But again, it's easy to say, I wish I had picked these winning lottery ticket numbers after the fucking drawing's been done. And that's all it's doing. You do the best you can with the information you have at the time, and you do it to the best of your ability. And I think
that's right. Yeah.
We all need to continue to do that.
Yeah, I think it has to be that way. So whatever resentments I hold for the truth in, that at times they don't do the right thing and actually completely fuck it up. You can even talk about that for other stuff, Vietnam and whatever, and go, hey, we lost that war. And you're like, did we lose it? Or did they just did it get wrapped up in politics and get fucked up from what the original purpose was, which is which is war. Which you want to do as quickly and violently as possible in order to end it as quickly as possible to stop further death from happening, right? Is really the intention. And so every time we do one of these long range wars that extends past a year or more or a couple of years, whatever, we're starting to get into that pattern and not learning from it.
Yeah.
So, but I'm never going to go back to say it was a waste because I was next to those guys, but they got killed, and I know the reason why they were there wasn't for that shit. It was for, we all signed a contract to do this. And
to say we're going to fight.
So if they abuse it, that's on them.
Yeah. I think even Vietnam, if you look at, so many years later now, a lot of people, I think most people in the United States would probably say it was a mistake. A lot of people would. I actually disagree with that. I've had a number of Vietnam vets on, and they have, I would say, a very paralleled perspective to you and I of what we just talked about towards their service and that war. But if you think about it from, you take a step back, look at it collectively, 30,000 foot view, if we hadn't done what we had done when we did it, Vietnam right now would probably be a lot like North Korea. And it's not.
Could be, yeah.
It's
exactly.
way more like America than it is North Korea, and that's not an accident.
Effect, yeah.
Yeah, now I think it's still too early to tell what Iraq and Afghanistan are going to be in another 20, 30, 50 years. But, there's, of course, so many layers, and you could dissect and pick apart and disagree with any one of them. But again, what purpose does it serve other than to just say, look, we did the best we could. Everybody's intention was to give their life if necessary for their country, and that's noble, valiant, and fucking important.
Yeah, and people there saw that.
Yeah.
People that are still there in that situation, the national sentiment is pretty ignorant from here in America for things like that, because most of it comes from people that have never experienced it or whatever. But if you've ever been there, you know that whatever concepts are underlying any war, or any conflict, or any social issue, or actually anything, in my opinion, above that mess of stuff is just it's just a spectrum between what's good and what's evil, right? And how much happiness and joy is happening in a place vice how much suffering and pain. And so, really, don't need to explain much more, like regarding the politics of a thing like the Taliban or whatever ruling a country, and whatever you believe them to be, right? Whether it's where it's good or bad, is like, if you ever went there and you could do a poll among thousands of people to go, is it joy and happiness here, or is it suffering and evil? And we're experiencing that here. It's like, dude, that's a thing that seems to be turning is, I've recently returned to my faith in Christ, from childhood, which I really did have it then, to go then like sort of understand this concept more of it's a spiritual war between good and evil, and less of blue versus red and left and right and politics and people. It's like that stuff's all there for us to fixate on, but the true concept above all of that is, are we good here and happy, or are we suffering and doing evil, right? And that's aside from each of our individual mistakes and past, like even yesterday, so that's like the dog thing, where I go, hey, assessing the energy of people want to make big decisions on things like hiring, or an investment, or a structuring it, like getting a COO or something like that, or partnering with somebody, is like, those are where it's critical to pay attention to that, because if you make the wrong decision, you might be fucked later. And it's so difficult, and I see that on a grander scale as like, as our country is fixating all of this, is like, we need to kind of see past that a little bit to go, what's good and what's evil in everything from our policies to who we choose for positions and stuff like that.
I think that's the biggest takeaway is, not to beat a dead horse, we all did what we did because we thought it was the right thing, so if you're unhappy with and or disagree with, how the U.S. military has been used in the last 25 years, you should look to the people who made those decisions to put us there, and how they dictated that we conduct ourselves, and let that drive your voting behavior moving forward.
Yeah, for sure.